There's a bunch of videos out there about details and technology in shoes, and there's even a bunch of videos from me breaking down specifics on technology within shoes and things to look out for. But it's time for an update, and I'm going to give you 3 tips that you need to know when buying your next pair of hoop shoes. What is good, everybody out there? Thanks again for checking in with Court Thoughts, the channel where we basically talk basketball. It's been a minute, but your boy's back in action. I'm coming back with some videos regularly now. I needed to take a break and just unwind. Had a lot of stuff happening in life and in basketball, so I needed to just take a moment and just chill out. If you've been watching this channel for quite some time, you've seen me do a bunch of videos on sneakers, sneaker technology, and videos breaking down details about why I bought a particular pair of shoes, how they wore, all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to provide you with an updated guide on things that I look out for when deciding to buy a particular pair of shoes. And it came at no better time than right now, because your boy literally just picked up a brand new pair of shoes today. What did I get? I'll show you. I picked up a brand new pair of Mellow 3s by Puma. Now, there was a couple of reasons why I bought these particular bad boys right here. Number one, so just look at them. Now, there's a lot of details that go into making a decision about buying shoes, and I've got 3 things that you need to absolutely make sure you do when you're buying your next hoop shoes. All right, let's get into it. I personally don't think it's smart to buy the shoes that your favorite player's wearing, because you may not necessarily play like that player, or you may not need the same things that that player needs in their shoes. Now, I've got a couple of shoes here to try and help me explain the point and help you understand exactly where I'm coming from. I have the Luka Doncic 2s. These bad boys right here, you can actually see they're very well played in. These are quite literally the shoes that I'm wearing right now at the moment until I bust out those Mellow 3s. I also have, I believe these were the Immortality 2s. I could be wrong, but it's the Giannis Immortality series. And the lucky last. Now, if you're following my shorts, brother, you've seen this shoe because I made a short on it, and it's Adidas the Kobe. I'm going to talk all about the reasons why I bought this shoe and my overall opinion once we've gone through all the key details. First thing that I want to understand, stability or speed. Let's get into it. Sometimes when people are deciding to get a shoe, stability is not really something that they focus on, and well, it might not be relevant for you, and generally that's going to be because you're wanting something a little bit more speedier, a little bit more lightweight. Now, we will get into lightweight a little bit later on, but if I want speed, a couple of things that I'm going to sacrifice on. The first thing is lateral containment. Lateral containment is when I step sideways in the shoe, how likely is my foot to peer over past the footbed? The footbed is basically the midsole and the sole, and where your foot sits over the shoe, right? Now, if you actually look, you can actually see this little bulge? You see how there's a little bit of a shadow that's here? Well, that's all because this is where my foot actually rolled over the footbed. Now, the footbed does flare out a little bit on this shoe, but if I want a speedier shoe, I'm looking at things like heel to toe transition. So how smooth is that heel in rounding and transitioning forward motion, or do I want something that's much more stable? If I want something much more stable, I'm going to have a little bit more of a meatier side paneling to the shoe. We can see we've got a panel right here, a fuse panel there, this big stripped panel that goes right from the toe box of the shoe all the way back to that heel. We've got this plastic guard section, basically a panel that helps protect your foot from rolling over the footbed. We can also see a little shark tooth version of that right here, and we also have this cross panel right here. And what this does is this protects over the top of your foot, and it helps keep your foot locked in, stable over the footbed. The more that your foot can float over the footbed, the more likely that the mechanics of your legs are going to have to compensate, which means either your ankle's going to have to roll, your knee's going to have to roll. And I personally don't want my shoes to roll, my ankles to roll, or my knees to roll, but I want to feel stable in the shoe. In doing that, we can see a couple of other little details that I like to look out for, and one of those things is sole. See how this is really round, and we can actually see on this side it's super round on this end as well. And looking over the shoe, we can actually see on the outside of the shoe, the lateral part of the shoe, this really comes out far in comparison to the actual material. I like to have a shoe like this to give me that lateral containment, because I'll generally be running over screens, a lot of sideways action, and I am a shooter, so I need to have footwork in my movements, and stability is really important within my footwork. So something that I like to look out for, a little test that I like to do when I'm considering stability is the push test. So if I push, see how the whole shoe moves in? Imagine what your foot's gonna do when your weight's behind it. Now let's compare it against the Luka 2. I'm using the same amount of force, moves in a lot less. A lot of that has to do with the overall structure of the shoe and the materials. So when you are going speedier, the shoe will be a lot more rounded. It's also going to be a lot more lightweight, and it is going to be feel a lot quicker on your feet, but that lateral containment is generally not going to be anywhere near as good. Now, one other little detail that I want to give you when it comes to stability is torsion plates. Now, what is torsion plates? And this is just literally a little plastic plate. In a lot more modern shoes, you'll see shank plates. I don't think you can actually see it. There's actually a plate that's in this shoe right here. In some of the other shoes, like the Jordan 13s, they've got carbon fiber at the bottom. Jordan 11s have got carbon fiber. And the whole idea is basically to treat it like a springboard and stop from the shoe being able to twist. You can see that I can't really twist the shoe a lot, and it wants to spring back into place. Well, yeah, the shoe kind of gives out, right? You compare that to the Kobe, brother. This ain't going anywhere. However, in saying that, that's not necessarily going to mean that it's always going to give you that springy feeling. It's just going to minimize the shoe twisting and moving. And other ways that they do that is providing you a little bit more security in the uppers. This shoe, like I was saying before with the push test, like, brother, this ain't going anywhere. Now, factoring those things in, I will generally try to understand, do I want stability or do I want speed? There isn't really a wrong choice if you don't have a preference. I personally would tend to lead towards stability, because stability helps, in my mind, minimize injury. But that's point number one. Let's move on to point number two. Do you need responsiveness or do you need cushioning? I did a previous video on the GT Jump, and it was a fantastic shoe. This shoe was a maximalist cushioning shoe. Bro, this was like putting my foot inside a bed of pillows surrounded by clouds. It was super, super soft, but there was a couple of downsides to that. Whenever you're dealing with cushioning or responsiveness, there's most of the technology that we're talking about, this is going to be within the midsole. Now, what exactly is the midsole? The midsole is this spot right here, this wedge of material. Understand that different companies essentially use very similar technologies, but do have little patented things that they do to target towards their audiences. One is trying to propel you forward, and one is trying to absorb and disperse the weight. In my opinion, there isn't necessarily one that is better than the other, and that's because everyone requires a different shoe. The shoe that Nikola Jokic needs is different to what Luka Doncic needs. And it's definitely going to be different to what Giannis Antetokounmpo needs. So understand what you need. A lot of the time, they'll even try to compensate by adding both of those things. Shoes that use both ends of that spectrum, you're going to find a lot more cushioning within the heel and a lot more responsiveness in the forefoot. Now, the forefoot is the front of your foot, and the heel is obviously the back end of the shoe. Shoes are never going to last for forever, and so you may find that the technology that I'm talking about, the springiness, the cushioning, and even the torsion, it will eventually wear out, and that's normally where I'll start to notice it. It's going to feel a little bit mushy. Sometimes it will feel a little bit flat or dead, and that generally is my first sort of signs I have to be aware that I might be looking for shoes soon. And the last thing that I really need to have an answer to is, do I need support or do I want something that is lightweight? Now, let's clear up something first and foremost. Support and stability is two very separate things. The Luka 2 is a stable shoe. It allows me to stay over the top of the footbed, by providing all these extra panels and a wide base of the shoe. It's basically containing my foot over the top, but it is not a tremendously supportive shoe. A much more supportive shoe will be something along the lines of the Kobe or even the Mellow 3, which I will be talking about at the very end of the video. The difference is in the uppers predominantly. Using the Kobe, we can actually see here we have these dual lined panels. This basically provides a little bit more contouring and containment towards the upper part of your foot, whereas the Luca is a little bit more of a lower cut shoe. And this swooping panel right here is essentially in line with this panel right here. So we actually have this extra little bit of meat up here that adds some extra containment to the foot, as well as a little bit more luxe feel around the upper section of the ankle here. This level of support can be a little bit confusing when we then start to think, well, a higher cut shoe is going to stop me from rolling my ankles. It is absolutely not going to do that. Let me just stop that first and foremost. I actually learned this from a YouTube channel called Foot Dr. Zach. I would highly recommend go ahead and check out his channel. One thing that he mentioned is shoes actually provide like a feedback loop, provides your brain the signals that there is extra movement in there, and it helps kind of correct those movements or prepare for movements. I personally find when my foot is in a lower cut shoe, I feel like it's a little bit more loose is the easiest way I can explain it. It doesn't feel like I'm not stable. I mentioned before that I was playing in the Luca 2 for quite some time and I really loved this shoe, but I just didn't like the cut of the shoe. I didn't like how low it felt, and it is a little bit weightier, so it kind of felt like things were a little bit more exaggerated on the bottom end of my foot. This shoe being higher wouldn't necessarily mean that it's going to minimize things like ankle sprains or anything like that. There's no way to minimize an ankle sprain other than creating a little bit more elasticity and strength in the supporting muscles in your lower limbs, as well as preparing your body for that type of movement. If you go and watch, there's a bunch of videos of Victor Wembanyama training his feet. He was able to then like roll his foot and just like keep moving, like it wasn't a factor, and that's because he's able to prepare his body for it. Now, would you run like that? Obviously not, but it basically gives you a little bit more elasticity. Support and lightweight, primarily for me, this is all about materials. When we look at something that is lightweight, there's a couple of characteristics that you will find common in lightweight shoes. They are almost always mesh. This is literally like feels like cotton. It's not cotton, but it feels like a cotton type of weave. Or you can have something like plasticky feeling and a little bit more fused. They literally eliminate a lot of the weight, but what they then do is they provide these extra fuse panels. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but there is a darker panel right there, and that just gives a little bit more lockdown contact with the foot and provides that extra layer of support, but it maintains that lightweight with the remainder of the material. Now, we need to understand what we want, whether we want a lightweight shoe or a supportive shoe, because it can also impact things like price point. Whenever we're looking at more supportive shoes, I've personally found historically that these types of shoes are going to require either more layering of synthetic materials, and this then adds to the top end of the shoe. It adds to the price point of the shoe. This shoe, when I bought it, was 180 Australian. This shoe has nowhere near the amount of support, but it also was nowhere near the price point. I think that this was maybe $120. And it shows because the material is so much thinner. But that might not necessarily be a problem for you. If we do start to look at some of the more modern shoes that are a little bit more supportive, we can see shoes like the new LeBron series where he's using this synthetic suede type material, and you either love it or you hate it. It holds on to heat a lot more. It is a little bit heavier, but it does personally tend to last a little bit longer because it is a thicker, denser material as opposed to like a mesh. Like the more holes that there is, the more that there's movement of those fibers, and then that essentially begins the breakdown process. You need to do your research and definitely wear the shoes. Go into the store, put them on, make sure that they fit your foot, because every single one of these shoes have a completely different profile. And just to prove the point, let me show you. See how pointed out the top of that shoe is? Let's compare that to the Luca. Way more rounded. Both of these shoes are size 13. Now looking at the Kobe against the Luca, same size yet again. Cuts and shapes of shoes can definitely add to the supportive nature of them as well as the overall fit, and it is a big factor that you want to make sure that you are comfortable in the shoe. There's no point buying this shoe because, you feel it ticks all these boxes and then you put it on and it feels like crap. It sucks to waste money like that, and it sucks even more to feel like you're trapped in a shoe that makes you feel uncomfortable. So factor these things in. Now you'll notice that there is one point that I really didn't spend a lot of time on, and that's traction. And let me just cover this off. Every sneaker company out there that makes shoes at different price points aren't going out there with the intention of making a shoe that has no traction. It's really, really silly to assume that that's the case, but I would absolutely say that there is a difference in traction. I personally tend to lean towards things that are a little bit more circular, or they are just straight up and down herringbone. The Kobe is a herringbone based shoe. This zigzag pattern provides support in a forward to backward motion, as well as a lateral or side to side motion. You can then see other versions of a little bit more of a modernized take on it with something like the Luca, where we've got these directional coverages. And like I said before, I tend to lean to things that are either like this, a bit more of a traditional way, or even something a little bit more modern like the Mellow 3. Now you can see this rounded pattern, it's basically doing the same thing. I personally don't care about things like squeak. In fact, this shoe makes zero squeak. And you know what? It doesn't matter. It makes nil difference. If you really, really care about the squeak of a shoe, brother, you got your priorities mixed up. It makes no difference. It does not change the way that the shoe plays. Now, the rubber fibers, 100%, the rubber compounds that they use will absolutely add to the wear and tear and the breakdown of these shoes. And I will say that things like having solid compounded rubber or having things that are translucent can overall add to the amount of dust that certain shoes pick up. But at the end of the day, these things here are temporary tools. Really understand that. They are temporary tools. They're going to last you a certain amount of hours wearing them. They will eventually break down. I personally like to try and get as much out of the shoe that I possibly can. You can find a shoe at any price point that will ultimately do what you want it to, as long as you're focusing on the key attributes that you're really trying to get. Again, just to summarize, those points are: do I want a stable shoe or do I want a speedy shoe? Do I want a responsive shoe? Do I want a cushion shoe? And lastly, do I want a supportive shoe or do I want a lightweight shoe? To wrap this video up, I'm going to summarize how I actually use that process when I bought these Mellows and give my final thoughts on the shoe. Overall, I find this shoe to be really, really stable. A big part of it is the fact that the actual frame of the shoe, although it is not as rounded as the Luca, still has that rounded nature to it, and I found that to be extremely comfortable. The lateral containment was there with these rubber fingers that come off from the outsole, as well as the overall cut of the shoe. This shoe here goes up a little bit higher, and what that does there is it just gives me that contact to my foot. It makes me feel a little bit more sure-footed. I don't feel unstable in the shoe. I actually really, really like it. And I also like the fact that the sides of the shoe here on both ends essentially are a little bit more rounded, and that just makes me feel a little bit more organic when I'm stepping. If you step on something that's a little bit more sharper edged, I find that you feel like you're like either on or off. When these are rounded, you can kind of like teeter and you're moving in these ways that you're hitting different positions on the shoe that it does need to be a little bit more rounded, at least in my opinion. It is not super, super luxe in cushioning. It is the right type of cushioning for me, and I really enjoy the feel. It's not distracting. Sometimes when these shoes are like really, really soft and spongy, I find that they can be a little bit distracting. And the real big thing that I love about this shoe, it straddles the line between being supportive and being lightweight. And that's just because of the fact that they've done things to eliminate some of the extra weight by providing it on a mesh base, but adding these extra fuse panels on there to give it that supportive feel, and also the luxe feel by adding little softer nodes to the shoe that's going to be in, you know, a bit more uncomfortable areas. Like this type of cut of shoe, if this area right here in the heel, if this was really hard, it would actually end up being really, really uncomfortable and sort of hitting in your Achilles, and it doesn't do that. So I really like the shoe, as well as the lace line. It does actually lace down really well and widen out. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, I think it's the Kyrie 2s, a middle ground between the Kyrie 2 and the Kyrie 1. And I loved the Kyrie 1.
I love that photo. I love it.
The only thing that I don't like about this shoe, and it's such a petty little detail, is just this like Pokemon holographic feature that's on there. I don't like super bright shoes, and you know, this is probably the tamest one that I've seen so far out of the Mellow range. But you know, that's my issue. It's not necessarily an issue I think that most people care about. And lastly, I have started a Patreon, and I am going to be adding a lot more content and detailed videos within that area that dive into various topics around basketball. Links in the description, as well as the rest of my social media details. So get at your boy. But listen, I've had so much fun talking about shoes. And until I see you next time, make sure you're looking after yourself, you take care, and be safe. All right, peace.